Look at your phone for a second. Or your coffee maker. Or even those floating shells you just put up in your living room.
Yeah, they all kind of blend into the background, though.
Exactly. But have you ever stopped to ask why they look the way they do? I mean, why is clean, minimal, and intuitive the global standard for basically everything we touch? Why isn't your toaster shaped like a dragon? Or why isn't your phone covered in ornamental flowers?
It's a really valid question. We tend to think of this clean aesthetic as just the default setting of modern life.
Right.
Like it's a biological process. An object just naturally evolved to be white rectangles with rounded corners.
Right, like that's just what technology looks like. But today we are going to find out that this wasn't an accident, it was actually a mission.
A highly calculated mission.
Yeah, so for this deep dive, we are looking at a stack of research on a place called the Huxley or just HFG for short. And honestly, until I read through these sources, I just thought the Bauhaus was the absolute be-all and end-all of modern design.
Most people do.
But this school, which only ran from 1953 to 1968, seems to be the actual grandparent of the iPod, IKEA, and basically every slick interface we use today. We're tracking the DNA of modern design back to this specific moment in history.
It is the grandparent, absolutely. But the story is much more complicated than just a group of people designing cool stuff.
Right.
What is fascinating is that HFC wasn't really trying to be an art school at all.
Which is wild for a design school.
Right, like a radical experiment to turn design into a hard science. It won't take talent until it's completely out of the equation.
Which sounds impossible. How do you design anything without taste? But that is exactly what we're getting into today. How a group of intellectuals in post-war Germany tried to calculate beauty using math.
And ultimately why they failed to make it a science, but still succeeded in changing how the entire world works. Which really grasps this before we look at the how and eventually why. Because this wasn't just about making pretty lamps and nice chairs. This was about a system.
That's the study of how we know of it.
They believe that if you can change how people interact with the object, you can change how they thought. And ultimately, this could have been
Research highlights that the founders weren't just designers, they were deeply politically motivated. And not just reporting what the sources say here or any political sides, but several of the founders had personal connections to the White Rose Resistance, which was a well-known anti-Nazi group.
Exactly. Inge School, whose siblings were executed by the Nazis, was a key founder. That is the critical piece of the puzzle. For them, design was a political act.
Because of what they just lived through.
Right. They had seen firsthand how the Nazis used aesthetics, but the big rallies, imposing architecture, emotional manipulation to control people. They really believed that a sovereign designer, basically an artist acting purely on intuition and emotion, was actually dangerous.
Because if you design based entirely on your feelings, how can anyone question you? It's completely unaccountable.
Yes, it's entirely subjective. The democratic design system all that flash and buy this because it's shiny stuff that was flooding into Europe at the time.
So naturally, looking at a German design school from that era, people just assume it's the Bauhaus again. But our sources are pretty emphatic that Ulm was absolutely not just Bauhaus 2.0.
So it's the most common misconception. Now, the early days that Max built were kind of similar to the Bauhaus, the idea of art disciplined by function. But the real Ulm legacy, the one that changed the world, begins when a guy named Tomas Maldonado takes over. He effectively kicked art out of the building.
This is the part of the research that just blew my mind. They stopped teaching art and started teaching
cybernetics, semiotics, systems theory, ergonomics. It was a complete shift in the toolkit. Maldonado didn't want students asking, does this look good? He wanted them asking, is this semiotically?
Let's ground this for the listener. I know semiotics is studying signs or symbols, but what does semiotically correct actually look like in the real world? Like, how do you apply that to, say, an entire airline?
The classic example from the sources is the Lufthansa visual identity, designed by Observational and Stephen Hall. Before this, an airline logo might just be a pretty bird chosen because the CEO happened to like the color blue. It was purely decorative. The Ulm team treated the airline's identity as a system.
So it wasn't just slapping a logo on a tail fin.
No.
It was everything. The specific yellow color, the precise mathematical curve of the crane logo, the grid used on the timetables, the font on the napkins. None of these were aesthetic choices in the traditional sense. They were signals.
Signals of what?
The goal was to transmit a signal of reliability, technical precision, and safety with absolutely zero ambiguity.
So the yellow wasn't chosen because it was cheerful or friendly. It was there because it had the highest signal-to-noise ratio against the blue and white sky.
Ornamentation is noise. A weird hand-drawn font is noise. They stripped all that away, so the signal of the airline, which is efficiency, came through perfectly.
That makes total sense. It's almost like programming a language rather than you are building a strict syntax for the brand.
That is a brilliant analogy. Or, take another example, the M125 shelving system, designed by Hans Gugelo. If you look at it, it just looks like very clean, modular shelving. But the dimensions weren't picked because they felt right in a room.
They were calculated.
Yes, they were derived from calculating standard room heights, standard paper sizes, and manufacturing constraints. They used math to decide exactly how big the shelf should be.
It's literally designed by algorithm, decades before we had computers to do it for us.
And they wanted to prove that a form was necessitated by its function. That if you did the math right, there was only one correct shape for a shelf.
Which brings us to this idea of the object as argument. We have to talk about the most famous thing to come out of this school, the SK4 method.
Or, as the famously named, coffin.
Best nickname ever for a piece of electronics, by the way. For you listening and trying to visualize this, imagine the year 1956. Most record players look like heavy wooden furniture, like your grandma's bulky sideboard.
Very ornate.
Right. Then Baron, working with the ARM guys, releases this sleek white metal box with light red sides and a completely clear acrylic lid. It must have looked like a UFO landed in the room.
It absolutely did. But here is where the Ohm philosophy gets applied so perfectly.
Yeah.
That clear acrylic lid. It wasn't a style choice just to look modern or futuristic. It was a semiotic solution.
Oh, so?
Well, they needed a way to show the user the device's status. Is the record spinning or not? And they wanted to do that without adding extra indicator lights or dials. If you make the lid clear, the record itself becomes the indicator. The lid is the communication.
Wow. And the buttons, too, they were all recessed into the top.
Right. Not just to look sleek, but to physically prevent you from bumping them by accident. Every single decision is accountable to a strict analysis. And here's where the whole thing is really interesting. There's a fatal flaw in this entire design. The science ideology. Yes. They claimed everything was purely derived from math, logic, and semiotics. But the end result, the white surfaces, the right angles, the sans serif text, the matte finishes, that is still is
Perfect. But they never designed they always designed this cool, austere, white geometry.
And the experts in the research call this post hoc rationalization. They already had an intuitive sense of what looked rational and intellectually hygienic to them, and then they essentially used the math to justify the fact.
They couldn't escape taste.
No, they couldn't. Taste was still driving the bus. Even if they tried to create a high number of massive power system series.
So they were cheating. Just a little bit.
Just a little bit. But that cheating gave us the modern look. It created a visual vocabulary for technology that we're still using today.
Okay, so the school itself actually closes in 1968, amidst all this intense internal fighting about whether design is truly a science or an art. But the method didn't die with the school, it just got a job.
It went corporate. And the biggest carrier of this ONA was Braun.
Braun, like the shaver company.
The very same.
Yeah.
And specifically, the design team led by Dieter Rams. Rams took that strict Ohm method, but he added a really crucial new layer to it. Ethics.
We spoke about the concept of honest design. I love this idea of course it's hardly relevant to discussion bias.
It is a powerful concept. Rams fundamentally believed in quality.
So what makes a taste of dishonest?
Even the cheap plastic station wagon from the 1970s with that fake wood paneling glued on the side. That is dishonest design.
It's plastic pretending to be wood to convey a fake sense of luxury that it simply doesn't possess.
Or like a vacuum cleaner that has huge plastic fins and fake vents to look like a jet engine just to manipulate you into thinking it's super powerful.
Exactly. That is manipulation. It is promising capabilities it doesn't actually have. Braun's philosophy